Victoria's Voluntary Assisted Dying law, how it works. Who is eligible for voluntary assisted dying?
The Voluntary Assisted Dying law is intended to provide an option that can limit suffering at the end of life only for those who are clearly dying. To be eligible, you must be 18 years of age or over, a Victorian resident, and Australian citizen. You must have decision-making capacity throughout the request process. You must be diagnosed with an incurable disease, illness, or medical condition that is advanced and progressive, and that will cause death within weeks or months, but not longer than 12 months. Your suffering has to be such that it cannot be relieved in a manner you find tolerable.
Who is not eligible for voluntary assisted dying?
Disability alone does not make you eligible. However, having a disability does not mean you are excluded if you meet the eligibility criteria. Similarly, mental illness and old age alone do not make you eligible. However, they do not mean you are excluded if you have decision-making capacity and meet all the other eligibility criteria. If you do not have decision-making capacity, for example through dementia or Alzheimer's, you are also not eligible. You can only be eligible if you meet all the criteria.
How do I access voluntary assisted dying?
A request for voluntary assisted dying can only be made by you. It must be voluntary and cannot be initiated by anybody else. This includes your doctor. Neither can it be part of an advanced care directive. To ensure that your wish is voluntary, informed, and enduring, you must make 3 separate requests, 2 verbal and 1 written and witnessed, with a minimum of 10 days between the first and final request. It is likely that your decision will be made after a long period of consideration. The maximum 12 months until death timeframe is designed to accommodate different diseases with longer but certain trajectories towards death, such as motor neurone disease.
Who assesses me to see if I'm eligible?
You must be assessed independently by 2 doctors, a coordinating and a consulting medical practitioner. Should they be willing to participate, this will most likely be your usual doctors. The coordinating medical practitioner is responsible for ensuring every step of the voluntary assisted dying process is completed. He or she will determine whether you meet the eligibility criteria, understand the information, are acting voluntarily and without coercion, and that your request is enduring. They will also refer you to the consulting medical practitioner who separately will assess whether or not you meet the eligibility criteria. Both doctors have strict reporting requirements to show that they are complying with the law.
Can any doctor assess me for eligibility?
No. Both medical practitioners must be qualified as fellows of a college, and at least one must have a minimum 5 years post-fellowship experience. At least one must also be a specialist in the disease, illness, or medical condition that is killing you. Before assessing a patient, both doctors are required to complete specialized training in assessing the eligibility criteria for voluntary assisted dying, assessing decision-making capacity of the patient, and identifying risk factors for abuse.
What if my doctor doesn't wish to participate in voluntary assisted dying?
All health practitioners have the option to conscientiously object to participating in the voluntary assisted dying process. If your doctor objects, they should inform you as soon as reasonably possible so that their objection does not impede your access to voluntary assisted dying.
What happens when I'm assessed?
Both medical practitioners will assess you to see if you meet the eligibility criteria and that you have capacity. This may take place over more than one meeting. The assessment process provides you with an opportunity to openly discuss any concerns you may have about your symptoms and your treatment, and for the medical practitioners to connect you with other support that may ease your suffering. As well, both doctors must inform you of your diagnosis and prognosis, the treatment options available to you and their likely outcomes, palliative care and its likely outcomes, that the expected outcome of taking the lethal dose of medication will be death, the possible risks of taking the lethal dose of medication, and any other information relevant to your needs. They must also inform you that you are under no obligation to continue with your request for voluntary assisted dying, and that you may withdraw your request at any time. Both medical practitioners must make a full report of their assessments to the Assisted Dying Review Board.
What if either doctor has doubts about my state of mind?
If either doctor has any doubt about your decision-making capacity throughout the voluntary assisted dying process, they must refer you to an appropriate specialist for assessment. Depending on the nature of their concern, this could be a geriatrician, psychologist, or other specialist. If you do not have decision-making capacity, you will not be eligible.
What if either doctor rules me ineligible?
Should either medical practitioner assess you as ineligible, you will not be able to access voluntary assisted dying. However, you have a right to seek a second opinion. If the coordinating medical practitioner finds you ineligible, you would need to recommence the process with a different medical practitioner. If the consulting medical practitioner finds you ineligible, the coordinating medical practitioner may refer you to another practitioner if they still believe you are eligible. No matter how many doctors you see, the bar never lowers. You must meet all the criteria to be eligible.
Can I also receive palliative care while seeking access to voluntary assisted dying?
Yes, it is the job of both doctors to explore what treatment and support you are currently getting to see if your suffering can be relieved in any way. In particular, this includes palliative care. Even if you are prescribed life-ending medication, you may decide not to take it, and that the support offered by palliative care is sufficient.
What if I want to withdraw from the voluntary assisted dying process?
You may withdraw from the process at any time. You will be reminded of this by both medical practitioners when they assess you, and also when you make your written request. If you withdraw from the voluntary assisted dying process and decide to make a subsequent request, you must recommence the process from the beginning.
What happens when I make a second written request?
If both medical practitioners assess you as eligible for voluntary assisted dying, you will be required to complete a written declaration to proceed. This will clearly demonstrate that you understand your decision and that your request is enduring. The declaration will need to be signed by you and witnessed by 2 independent witnesses, neither of whom can be a beneficiary under your will or directly involved in your health care, in the presence of the coordinating medical practitioner.
What happens when I make a third and final request?
In order for a prescription for life-ending medication to be written, you must make a final verbal request to your coordinating medical practitioner that you wish to proceed with the option of voluntary assisted dying. There must be a minimum of 10 days between this request and your first request. This ensures that your decision to request voluntary assisted dying is well considered without unnecessarily prolonging your suffering. After your final request, the coordinating medical practitioner must then complete a certification for authorization to certify that all of the requirements for you to be prescribed medication have been met. This will go to the Assisted Dying Review Board. Before you can be prescribed the medication, you must also appoint a contact person, whose details will be registered with the board. They will be responsible for returning any unused medication after you have died. The contact person could be a member of your family or a trusted friend.
How is the life-ending medication dispensed?
To write you a prescription for the lethal medication, the coordinating medical practitioner must first receive a permit from the Department of Health and Human Services. This provides an opportunity for an independent check that the process has been complied with before medication is prescribed.
What role does my pharmacist play?
Your pharmacist can only dispense the lethal dose of medication once they have a valid permit from the Department of Health and Human Services. As with other drugs, they must inform you about how to take the medication, including any necessary pre-medication required for it to work. They will also be required to attach clear labels to the medication to indicate that it is a lethal dose and to inform you about its safe storage, including your responsibility to store it in a locked box.
How can I be confident the medication will be secure?
The medication represents control over your dying days. You will naturally guard it carefully. As well, you will be required to keep it in a locked box. Even were someone to find it, it is unlikely to cause harm. The lethal dose will be a drink and will require a series of medications to be ingested in a particular order and in large enough volumes for it to be effective.
What happens when I take the medication?
Like many Australians, you may wish to die at home. You may, if you wish, want to have friends and family with you. You may also ask your doctor to be with you. They can provide you with pain relief and other care. However, unless you are physically unable to self-administer or digest the medication, they cannot administer the lethal dose to you. The medication is in the form of a drink which you decide whether or not to take. It will quickly put you to sleep and you will die peacefully, most likely within a few hours. Self-administering the medication is a final indication that your decision is voluntary.
What if I'm not capable of self-administering the medication?
In rare circumstances, if you have become incapable of drinking or digesting the medication, the coordinating medical practitioner can be authorized to administer it to you. To do this, they will have to apply to the Department of Health and Human Services for a permit to administer the lethal dose of medication. They may only administer the medication at your request and in the presence of an independent witness who can certify that you have capacity and that your request was voluntary.
How is my death recorded?
The medical practitioner who certifies your death must notify the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages if they are aware you have been prescribed or that you self-administered a lethal dose of medication. To preserve your privacy and that of your family and health practitioners, your death certificate will identify the underlying disease, illness, or medical condition as the cause of death. However, a full record relating to your use of the lethal medication will be shared by the registrar with the Assisted Dying Review Board so that the use of all medication can be accounted for.
What happens to the medication if I die without using it?
The use of lethal medication is monitored at every step of the process. There is mandatory reporting within 7 days to the Voluntary Assisted Dying Review Board by the Department of Health and Human Services when the prescription is authorised, by the pharmacist when the prescription is dispensed, and by the pharmacist when unused lethal medication is returned to them to be destroyed. The person responsible for returning unused medication is your registered contact person. Should they fail to do so, the review board, which will have a record of the medication's prescription, will follow them up.
How much oversight is there of voluntary assisted dying?
A voluntary assisted dying review board will be established under statute to review every case of voluntary assisted dying, regardless of the outcome, to ensure all requirements have been complied with. There is mandatory reporting by medical practitioners to the board within 7 days of completing the first assessment, completing the second assessment, completing the certification of authorization, administration of a lethal dose by a medical practitioner. Reporting forms must be lodged with the Voluntary Assisted Dying Review Board at every step of the process. If prescribing or seeking to administer a dose of lethal medication, the coordinating medical practitioner must receive authorization from the Department of Health and Human Services. Additionally, a pharmacist can only dispense lethal medication with authorization from the Department of Health and Human Services. Any breaches detected by the Voluntary Assisted Dying Review Board must be referred to the appropriate authority for investigation, such as Victoria Police, the Coroner, or the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. Finally, it is important to remember that voluntary assisted dying will never occur in isolation. Beyond the mandatory involvement of 2 assessing medical practitioners, a pharmacist, a nominated contact person, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Voluntary Assisted Dying Review Board, there will be many others in your treatment team, including most likely palliative care doctors and nurses, as well as your friends and family, to offer you support, advice, and comfort in your final weeks and months.